Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. It is wonderful to see you all. Thank you for being here for Beauty, Law, and the Environment. My name is Mark McEnroy. I'm a member of the Theology Department at the University of St. Thomas, and I have the privilege of co-directing the Claritas Initiative on Beauty, Goodness, and Truth, along with Vice Provost Wendy Wyatt. We are really delighted that all of you are here. As we get underway, I'd like to offer a few words on our topic, and after which I'll introduce our panel and then outline our procedure. And as we get underway, it might be good for us to keep in mind the words of Pope Francis, who is, of course, on many of our minds and in our prayers at this particular moment. Near the beginning of his encyclical, Laudato Si', Francis says the following: if we no longer speak the language of fraternity and beauty in our relationship with the world, our attitude will be that of masters, consumers, ruthless exploiters, unable to set limits on our immediate needs. By contrast, if we feel intimately united with all that exists, then sobriety and care will well up spontaneously. And later in the same text, he explains the relationship between a good aesthetic education and the maintenance of a healthy environment cannot be overlooked. By learning to see and appreciate beauty, we learn to reject self-interested pragmatism. If someone has not learned to stop and admire something beautiful, we should not be surprised if that person treats everything as an object to be used and abused without scruple. Many more references to beauty permeate Laudato Si' and other writings of Pope Francis. And I would suggest that this view would be surprising to some of us, those who regard beauty as perhaps merely ornamental, cosmetic, trivial, inconsequential. Such views are out there in our world. But contrary to that assessment of beauty, Francis here sees an appreciation for beauty as playing a crucial role in the care for our common home. Beauty is quite consequential then. Our project today is to explore the implications of this way of thinking for law. And we ask, as was in the publication materials for this event, does the law have an obligation to protect beauty? What impact does beauty have on environmental legislation? And to explore these issues, we are extremely fortunate to have a panel of faculty at the University of St. Thomas with expertise across a wide range of disciplines. So let me introduce them now. We have first Elizabeth Schultz, who is the John D. Herrick Professor of Law and Associate Dean for Academic Affairs. And Dean Schultz has research interests, as many of you here will know, in disability law and theory, feminist legal theory, consumer protection, and banking law, some of which will come into play today, perhaps. We also have with us Father Martin Schlag, who is the Alan W. Moss Endowed Chair for Catholic Social Thought and co-director of the Terence J. Murphy Institute. Father Schlag's research focuses on the tradition of Catholic social teaching and political and economic questions. Specifically, he studies how the Christian faith over the centuries related to markets, trade and exchange, money and interest, and private property and social justice. His focus is on how to promote principled business leadership for the common good and to overcome poverty by including the poor into the market economy. And finally, we have with us Amy Levad, who is Professor of Theology in the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of St. Thomas. Her primary areas of interest are mass incarceration and the ethics of criminal legal systems. She has 2 books on those topics. And she also has expertise in restorative justice, race and racism, community organizing, ecological ethics, and Catholic social thought. So as perhaps comes through with that list of expertise, we are really quite fortunate to have this panel. Concerning our procedure, we will begin with Dean Schultz, then proceed to Father Schlag, and then move to Professor Levad. And after our panelists have made their contributions, we will invite them to respond to one another, after which we will open up the conversation to all of you. Please join me then in welcoming Dean Lisa Schultz.
Thank you. Thank you. It is a real pleasure to be participating in something that I know nothing about, which is environmental law, with such esteemed colleagues. And I really am grateful that the Murphy Institute invited me and that you all are here. I was fortunate enough to have been invited to participate in the inaugural program of the Claritas Institute back in September of 22. And that was a talk that was given by Professor Jennifer Newsom Martin, who was a Catholic systematic theologian from Notre Dame. And at that program, USD professors from a couple of different disciplines, philosophy, business, engineering, and law, were asked to respond to her really brilliant talk on beauty, the forgotten transcendental. That paper has been published since in the Church Life Journal of Notre Dame, and it's a really excellent read. All of us panelists of this program were asked to reflect on how the idea of beauty comes in, how we can use it in teaching our particular subjects. The idea from her paper that captured my imagination was her reflection on the temporal aspects of beauty. She reflected on her reaction to the beauty of a patch of sunflowers in her garden that she couldn't stop looking at and never tired of looking at. I'm going to read a little bit from her paper. I regard the sunflowers in a mode of absolute gratuity, contemplating without expectation these magnificent, endlessly fascinating heliotropes which followed the sun all day with attentive, cheerful faces turned toward the corollary giftedness of its rays. To look at them, and I know saying this probably approaches cliche, makes my heart soar, S-O-A-R. I actually feel it in my chest, but also in a very real way, it makes my heart soar, S-O-R-E. The homonymic potential here between soar and soar is very apt, because in my own experience of beauty, if I am paying attention, it is really something of both. He calls it a cocktail of bliss and pain together, and inextricably so. I suppose that theoretically it's possible I'm just more sentimental than most, but I would venture a guess that I'm not the first or only person in this room who has ever been brought to the point of tears, or at least a lump in the throat by a perfect sentence in a book, an expertly rendered line of a poem, a subtle strain of music, an ethical or selfless act, a stirring cinematic scene, a moment in a liturgy, or the sight of some overwhelming phenomenon in the natural world. She continues, we should also recognize that this sense of painful but paradoxically delightful longing is often accompanied by an awareness that whatever beautiful phenomenon we are perceiving is at the very same time something passing away. Even as I behold my sunflower swaying in the gold September air, impossibly tall, impossibly vivid against the blueness of the perfect sky, I can sense their precarity. I know their petals will inevitably loosen and fall. The goldfinches will rob them of their seeds. Too soon, another December snow will cover what is left of their stalks. So it was this temporal aspect of beauty that she described that engaged me imaginatively and in my thinking about the law. She says that whenever we experience beauty, we drink this cocktail of bliss and pain together, inextricably so. Theologians help us recognize that pain's tide is tied to our deepest longing for the infinite, for God, for the divine. We cannot attain the infinite in our finite lives, but beauty affords us a glimpse of what we do not have. And Jennifer also stresses that the ephemeral nature of what we experience as beautiful heightens the emotions evoked by beauty and seems to be somehow intrinsic to the experience of beauty. On the one hand, it seems that experiencing beauty causes us pain because it affords us a glimpse of the eternal that we can't grasp, that we can't have. The divine, the unchanging permanent, right? On the other hand, awareness of what is ephemeral about an object of beauty seems to have some special significance in the experience of beauty, in making something beautiful. One of the times in my life that I was most vividly affected by this experience of beauty was the first time I saw the Grand Canyon live. Looking down at that massive chasm in the earth, seeing the stunningly gorgeous colors of the layers of stone cascading down to the blue waters of the river at the bottom, I was pulled out of the present. I felt connected to the countless people who had stood at that same spot through millennia, sharing the same sense of awe in the power of God that I was feeling. I drank in that cocktail of bliss and pain, losing myself in that longing for the infinite that I could just dimly glimpse in the permanence of that giant gash in the earth. The tension between the permanent and the ephemeral was part of that experience, part of what moved me. That canyon has been the source of human wonder for millennia, but it was created gradually by forces of nature, the interaction of water on stone, that are still at work changing it for the future. So what did all this have to do with law or teaching law, right? I often ask my first year students at the beginning of the class, what do they imagine law school was going to be like? And most of them, what did you imagine when you were going to come to contracts class, what it was going to be like? And most of them imagine, they saw the movies, but also what they really imagine is they could be sitting in a lecture and they're going to just be learning rules, learning the law. And the law was a lot of rules about subjects like criminal law or contracts law. You go to law school to learn those rules, and then you explain those rules to your clients and you apply those rules. And in fact, in countries that follow a civil law tradition, that is sort of what law school is like. You get lectures, you learn the rules, right? And you apply them. But the US is a common law system. And in a common law system, we do have a lot of important laws that are enacted by legislatures and vast swaths of law, though, that are not governed by any statute at all. Instead, the rules of law emerge from the opinions of thousands of judges who look at the facts of a particular case that is in front of them and pronounce a decision based on applying principles divined from precedents set by judges in past cases and the policies behind those principles. So the first year of law school is largely devoted to reading opinions and learning how to extract rules from those opinions. In class, after you identify the rule of a case, you're asked how that rule would apply to various hypothetical situations that your clients might bring you as a lawyer. This pedagogy is really effective for training students to think like a lawyer because it does in certain ways replicate what lawyers are going to have to do, but it has some pernicious effects. There's an article written by Roger Crampton, the former dean of Cornell Law School, called The Ordinary Religion of the Law School Classroom, and it describes some of those pernicious effects. And we assigned that article to every single one of our 1Ls for their orientation week here at the law school. One of the two essential ingredients of the ordinary religion of the American law school classroom that Crampton identifies is that it breeds a skeptical attitude towards generalizations, principles, and received wisdom. Law students are fed this steady diet of borderline cases, right? Easy cases don't teach you anything interesting. So you always get these borderline cases. You need to have something to argue about in class. But students can start to think that all of life and all of law is that way, that there are no right answers. There's just winning arguments. This also emphasizes the uncertainty and the instability of law. It de-emphasizes the fact that stability, permanence, predictability, and certainty are also important features of any just legal system. It encourages a hypercritical approach to opinions written by just judges to justify their opinions. Students are trained to read judicial opinions as exercises of will, to be approached on as a hunt for hidden motives. Cases are rarely presented as an effort by a principled judge to discover the truth through the application of reason. Crampton also argues that the ordinary religion of the law school classroom incorporates an instrumental approach to law and lawyering. The case methodology that I just described, it constantly thrusts law students into the role of an advocate who's asked to use the existing rules to further the client's case. Students are trained by being asked daily how to use legal principles and arguments to influence decision makers to decide in favor of their client. The lawyer is a hired gun, trained in the dispassionate use of legal skills for the instrumental purposes of those they serve. Now, all of those observations that Crampton made, those are all related to modernity's pervasive value relativism, right? The ordinary religion of the law school classes also accepts that because there's so little agreement on fundamental values, that values shouldn't be part of the public discourse and they shouldn't be part of law school discussions and not part of legal analysis. Here at UST Law, we do attempt to counter this idea because we believe that values do have a place in professional formation of each of us as lawyers and also in the public discourse that we're going to be engaged in as lawyers. But I wonder whether the concept of beauty, particularly that temporal aspect of beauty that I discussed earlier, opens a way to engage budding lawyers in combating some of Crampton's critiques. In the ordinary law school classroom that Crampton describes, the ephemeral aspects of law totally crowd out any consideration of any permanent aspects of law. The focus is always on the contingent. Particular facts of one case, personal motives of a particular judge, goals of a particular client, facts or logic as they are to be applied to that particular case. The enduring, the permanent, the features of law that correspond to universal values, or what we here at Catholic Law School might call natural law, are left out of the analysis of the conversation in the ordinary classroom. But appeals to natural law just don't have much purchase in our world. So could we find ways to talk about the elements of the eternal that underpin our notions of justice as beautiful counterpoints to the contingencies of particular cases? For example, take the concept of human dignity. In our first year orientation class, we assigned a series of readings from a bunch of different faith and philosophical traditions that all share a common view of human dignity. And we want to show how universal that concept is. And maybe that's helpful to show that some values are not relative, but rather universal. That's why we include it in the class. But maybe we could think of a way to invoke the experience of beauty, to do something even more with the concept of dignity. What if we talked about the beauty of the interaction between the permanent, unchanging truth of human dignity and the contingent, ephemeral situations and facts in which law develops to engage that truth? What if we talked about legal opinions or laws that disregard human dignity, not just as examples of naked assertions of power, but also sips of that cocktail of pain and bliss, because that accompanies imperfect renderings of justice? Give us that glimpse of eternity and what it could be if we were thinking about the permanent ideal that we're trying to reach to, and then the pain of this ephemeral situation and this person not applying it in a way that doesn't accord with that what is permanent. I don't think it would be easy to find the vocabulary to do this, but I think it might be possible. And Crampton, he ends the article with, if there is really something that can be called truth, beauty, or justice, even if in our finiteness we cannot always agree on what it is, then law school could be a place of searching and creativity that aspires to identify and accomplish justice. So I'm really looking forward to hearing my colleagues who know much more about environmental law describe how this might apply in this particular context and help me develop my thinking about this.
Well, thank you so much, Liz, for this beautiful beginning. And so let's see. How does this work? Maybe I have to click. Oh dear. How does this work? That's not what we want to see.
I hate that. Those things always pop up.
Ah, there we go. Perfect. Can we go one back?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so you know, my field of research is Catholic social thought, and I also teach business ethics at the business school. And so first of all, thank you for coming here, for being here and showing interest for a topic that exceeds the immediate applicability of your studies. So it's good to, as Liz just said, to look at the universal values. So I was looking into whether beauty appears as a normative category in business ethics, and 0. So I put it into Business Premier, and there's not one mention. And so I was like, why is that? You know, and probably because it's associated with aesthetics or with feelings, and it's not seen as a normative category. So what I will try and do is to show how we could do that. And I use Aquinas, who developed 3 criteria for beauty, and he takes those from Pseudo-Dionysius, right? So it's a missing category. My approach to beauty was actually through technology. And simply because I had to write about technology and think about technology. And then I stumbled across this point in Laudato Si by Pope Francis, where he says, technoscience, when well directed, can produce important means of improving the quality of human life from useful domestic appliances to great transportation systems, bridges, buildings, and public spaces. It can also produce art and enable men and women immersed in the material world to leap into the world of beauty. Who can deny the beauty of an aircraft or a skyscraper? Valuable works of art and music now make use of new technology. So, in the beauty intended by the one who uses new technical instruments and in the contemplation of such beauty, a quantum leap occurs, resulting in a fulfillment which is uniquely human. So technology has a lot to do with environment, because it's basically technology and business-driven technology that pollutes the environment, it destroys the environment. But then we say, well, maybe technology could produce the means with which we remove all this, and so it's an ambiguous concept. And so one day I visited the Columbia Yacht Club in Chicago, where there is the clubhouse is a big boat which served for decades in Canada as the ice-breaking ferry between the mainland and Edward Island, and it could transport railway carriages, and there was no bridge at the time. And when they built the bridge, that ferry wasn't necessary anymore. So they took it to Chicago, and they have one free day per year where you can go in. So my friend, who's a philosopher, but he loves boats, he wanted to see it, and we went in, and there was the engine of the boat, okay? And he started raving about the beauty of the pistons in that engine. And then he started raving about the beauty of sailing boats. And then I heard afterwards that he had won an important regatta. And so he really knows about sailing boats. And so, they're the pistons. Yeah, okay. Yeah, fine. And so I realized I don't have the perfection of being to perceive the beauty of this technical perfection. So there is not only perfection in the thing, but also in the beholder. And the word behold is such a beautiful English word. It's to hold it, somehow to acquire it. And so, what do I behold it as? Perfect? Well, as a means to an end. It's really very functional. It works well, but I also have to know the end must be good, morally good. So I have to be able to judge the moral aim correctly. So I came up with a term. I call it eutechnology. Okay, so it's like eudaimonia, which is happiness. So I say, well, the perfect technology is eutechnology, and it requires this twofold perfection. Okay, so yeah, eureka, we have found. This isn't really working. We have found eutechnology might be a path to finding that. So I'll be very fast with this. But in order to perceive perfection, we all think in narratives. We have our traditions, and I found these two in a Harvard Business Review article. The distinction between the insecure overachiever who says, well, technology and business must be humanized and go slow and heal people as you do that. And then there's the unprepared overachiever who says, humanism must be useful for my efficiency, and I'm going to go fast and break things. Okay, so I don't make any political allusion today. And so the role of humanism is described in this article as a marriage of inconvenience, because humanism is valuable not because it is useful, but because it causes trouble, right? So it's the task of humanism to question whether the technology really serves the human person. And Pope Francis has been repeating that we need a new humanism, or an integral humanism, or a Christian humanism. And humanism in general aims at the well-being of the human person, and that includes the environment. So Francis speaks of an integral ecology, which has the three dimensions of business growth, of social concern, and of concern for the environment. And in the Christian tradition, it means that we believe that Christ's teaching is what best promotes happiness on earth, not only in heaven. So my favorite dialogue, my favorite Platonic dialogue is the Gorgias. I just find it hilarious how Socrates kind of destroys the arguments of Gorgias in a very good way. And Gorgias, as you might remember, says, "Well, I teach rhetoric, which is good for everything, and it's only about persuasion. So you can persuade anybody about anything, even though you have no idea of what you're talking. It's just a technique." And so Socrates, just with his questions, gets Gorgias to reflect. And he says, well, look, there are actually technology, techniques that deserve the name. And he says there's a technique for the body where you either preserve its health or you repair the health, you heal the health. And he says to preserve health or to avoid getting sick, you do gymnastics. Okay? But if you can also fake gymnastics, and he says with cosmetics, you're not really well, but you paint yourself or I don't know, whatever you do, and you appear to be healthy, but you're not. And then he says, and there's also, once you are sick, well, you can either go and have the technique, the true technique of medicine, or you just produce feeling good with drugs or with, he calls it pastry baking. So I guess we would say sugary drinks nowadays or whatever. And that's why I have this ice cream there, and he calls that a knack, an empiria, a mere technique. And so he says, well, it is true, therefore, that there's a true politics which is based on justice. And what you're doing is just persuasion. It's just a knack. It's not real technique, So in the end, I think Plato's theory is super attractive, but it doesn't really convince to the last, because we all, I think, by intuition would say, well, a good boxer is actually a really good technician of boxing, but if he uses it for the wrong means, he's a criminal. Or like, well, a robber, he's really a great robber. He's really a good robber. He knows how to really open those safes and steal the money, is really world-class robber, But we would say, well, but he lacks the moral end. So, and that's where Aristotle is more convincing, I think, because he has the concept of phronesis or prudence that judges the aim. So, and this is one of my favorite animated movies, The Beauty and the Beast, because the designer of these figures, he captures this moment where I don't know what is the girl's name? Belle. Sorry, Belle. Sorry, I always call her Beauty. So Belle has fallen in love with the Beast. Okay, and she loves this person, and he gets transformed back into this beautiful, handsome young man. And when she first sees him, you can feel in the movie how she is repulsed, because she doesn't love the characteristics of that man, but she loves the person. And then she looks him in the eyes and sees it's him, and so the beauty it has to do with something else than mere pleasure or mere senses. And this is what Aquinas captures. Aquinas says all beauty in the end reflects God. And he gives us 3 criteria. He says beauty is when something is perfect, when there's perfection, when there's consonance, and when there is brightness or claritas. I guess that's why it's called the Claritas Initiative. Okay, and so, but he says, well, in actually, beauty is the same thing as truth and goodness. It's a combination of both. So what does beauty add? And he says, well, it's when you add the cognitive power. When in German one says das Aufleuchten. So it's like the radiance, but it's more like when the sun goes up, all of a sudden in your awareness, goodness and truth start shining, and that's what we feel as beauty. That's what we experience as beauty. And so we've talked about perfection. Consonance is agreement, mutual affection, union between human beings, which is in the end built on union with God. Right, so the goodness of technology lights up in our mind. It's beautiful when we recognize its perfection, consonance, and brightness. Okay, that I already have said. And then, so we've done this, perfection. Okay, so consonance. When would consonance be there? Well, when it includes, when it's inclusive, including also the environment, and it helps the environment, but not when it is used for surveillance, when it is destructive of the environment, when it reinforces bias, hate speech, and transhumanism, and so on and so on. This would be something where then legal scholars come in and say, well, how do we concretize all these three criteria? These are, I think, useful normative criteria, both for ethics and morality and for law, whereby law has different, you can't legalize everything, you can't criminalize or forbid everything that is immoral. So it needs this prudential judgment to see what should be object of law. And brightness means perceptibility, visibility in its own kind. And so we could say, well, it's the accessibility of technology. I love emojis because they cross language barriers. It's incredible. You can send people emojis whose language you don't speak and they understand. Okay, so one question, and with this I end, is, but we see the world is ugly. There's so much ugliness in the world, So how do we do this? And there's something very interesting that happened in the Christian tradition. In the classical Latin, in classical Latin, the word for beauty is pulchritudo or formositas. And it was understood as proportion, the right proportion, the beautiful human body, the human figure by Vitruve with all the proportions, But then Christians encountered Christ on the cross, and he was disfigured and ugly, but he's called the most beautiful of the children of man, of man, right? And so how do we get this together? And it just didn't fit in the language. It didn't make sense to call Jesus formosus or pulcher. So they took a word which existed in Latin but was hardly used, and that is bellus. And that is the origin of our word beauty. So I understand it as Christian love gives beauty to what in the eyes of the world is ugly. And it's our love which gives beauty to people who we might not feel attractive. And so so I think this is not only does Pope Francis repeat 44 times in Laudato Si beauty, and he in Evangelii Gaudium says we have to go on the via pulchritudinis in Catholic social thought, but he also speaks about contemplation, because the contemplative outlook perceives this beauty in others. And with this I finish. So thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, it works. We'll go with it. All right. So we were given a prompt. The appreciation of beauty stands to have a concrete and meaningful impact on legislation that is directed to address environmental degradation. And I warned Dr. McEnroy, I was like, that's a statement about which I have some questions. And so I have many. I'm going to go with 3 areas of inquiry. First, it doesn't work. It's not technology. Okay.
It moved.
All right. It's not you technology. No. Okay. So does appreciation of beauty have an impact on environmental legislation? And if so, what sort of beauty is impactful? My answer is yes and no. It depends on the type of legislation, and it depends on what we might mean by beauty. Let's consider three types of environmental law, which are overlapping and intersect, but we'll go with a simple typology. First is regulation. For example, the Clean Air Act of 1970, the Clean Water Act of 1972, and the Toxic Substances Control Act of 1976. Notably, all of these were passed under Republican administrations with Democrat-controlled Congresses. These acts were not inspired first and foremost by appreciation of beauty. Rather, they were in response to growing awareness of the dangers of pollutants as well as to specific disasters. For example, at least a dozen fires on the Cuyahoga River caused by oil slicks from industrial dumping. All environmental regulation laws were enacted because something really bad happened, which is important to remember when people want to do away with regulation. There's a reason it's there. Second, we could have management laws, such as the National Forest Management Act of 1976 or the Coastal Zone Management Act of 1972. These acts are concerned with the beauty of coasts and forests, but also are framed to protect them as natural, commercial, recreational, ecological, and industrial resources. The purpose of these acts isn't exclusively or even primarily to protect natural beauty. Rather, they are directed to the effective management, beneficial use, protection, and development of forests and coasts. Management laws are about protecting ecosystem services such as food sourcing, material sourcing, natural regulating such as water purification, flood control, recreation, nutrient cycling in ways that can enable more sustainable human use. It's about human use. It's not about the beauty of the thing in and of itself. Finally, our third category could be conservation, such as the Endangered Species Act of 1973 and the National Parks Organic Act of 1916, which established the National Park Service. The fundamental purpose of the national parks is to conserve the scenery and the natural and historic objects and the wildlife therein, and to provide for their enjoyment in such manner and by such means as will leave them unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. So it seems to me inspired by beauty. The Endangered Species Act was inspired by growing awareness of threats of extinction, disaster, as with regulation, something really bad happening, such as the near extinction of the bald eagle due to hunting and exposure to DDT. The text of the law also cites the aesthetic, ecological, educational, historical, recreational, and scientific value of endangered species. With both the ESA and the Foundation of National Parks, we may want to be cautious about the limited or romanticized ideas of beauty that inspired them. With the Endangered Species Act, it's relatively easy to appeal to the beauty of the bald eagle. As a national symbol, a regal bird, humans like protecting charismatic megafauna, especially iconic examples. It's on the back of our quarter, right? So it's hard to make the case that the snail darter is worth saving, especially when the Tellico Dam on the Little Tennessee River, its sole habitat, and an energy project of the Tennessee Valley Authority is the main threat to that habitat. I dare you to make a strong argument about the beauty of the snail darter. That's convincing. I mean, good luck. For example, with the formation of the national parks, appeals to natural beauty of many parks depends on ignoring or minimizing the presence of Native people in and around them and their use of these lands. Many parks are portrayed as pristine locations, untouched by human hands, which is presumed to be key to their beauty. This ideology led, for example, to the removal or restriction of the Shoshone in Yellowstone, the Miwok in Yosemite, the Havasupai in the Grand Canyon, and the Blackfeet in Glacier. Just a short list. So beauty can be and has been impactful, but only with certain types of environmental legislation, more with conservation than with management or regulation, which seem to depend more on the experience and memory of disaster. Often, only certain conceptions of natural beauty that tend to be romanticized, such as the iconic, regal, charismatic, big seems to be really important in the United States, and pristine. And other motivations can be more important for getting a law passed, such as managing ecosystem services in order to continue use and extraction practices responding to disaster. My second area of inquiry is environmental legislation the best tool for protecting beautiful things? Not always. A lot could be said about this question, so I want to highlight two limitations of environmental legislation and note possible tools other than law that can be useful for environmental protection in some contexts. So first, one limitation of legislation as a tool: conservation legislation, the type that is most likely to be inspired by beauty, is often difficult to enforce. The habitats of endangered species tend to be remote, and the incentives established through law for people living in or near these habitats can be perverse. That is, the laws as framed can encourage their violation. Finding an endangered species on your property can result in federal regulation of your land use, which is typically costly. Some landowners, therefore, respond to the presence of an endangered species not with awe and wonder at its beauty, but fear and trepidation of the consequences of keeping it around. The shorthand way of dealing with this problem, coming from somebody from Western Colorado near lots and lots of ranches, is shoot, shovel, and shut up. Better that no one know that the endangered Gunnison sage grouse is on my ranch than have the federal government impede my property rights and require changes to my land use. Yet most habitat for endangered species is on private land, so preservation of these species requires the cooperation of landowners. Here, legislation could be helpful, but it would be necessary to change the incentive structure created by the laws so landowners are benefited by the presence of an endangered species rather than harmed. Notably, beauty alone does not seem to be enough to get many landowners on board with these efforts. Even like, that's a noble looking bird. It's better than a snail darter. So my second limitation of environmental legislation is that law is subject to the whims of the powerful, who often lack the moral compass, respect for beauty, common sense, courage, patience, or wisdom to care for our common home. To elaborate this point, I quote Pope Francis in Laudato Si with minimal comment because, especially at this moment, I think he speaks for himself. He warns, here continuity is essential because policies related to climate change and environmental protection cannot be altered with every change of government. Results take time and demand immediate outlays, which may not produce tangible effects within any one government's term. That is why, in the absence of pressure from the public and from civic institutions, political authorities will need to will always be reluctant to intervene, all the more when urgent needs must be met. He continues, to take up these responsibilities and the costs they entail, politicians will inevitably clash with the mindset of short-term gain and results which dominates present-day economics and politics. But if they are courageous, they will attest to their God-given dignity and leave behind a testimony of selfless responsibility, a healthy politics, capable of reforming and coordinating institutions, promoting best practices, and overcoming undue pressure and bureaucratic inertia is sorely needed. Third, tools other than law. In some circumstances, with some aspects of our environment, tools other than law may be more effective at protection. Garrett Hardin, in his classic but flawed article, The Tragedy of the Commons, describes 3 broad tools for environmental protection: appeals to conscience, take care of this, it's pretty; privatization, you own it, you should take care of it; and government regulation, you have to because we told you so. Now, appreciation of beauty probably falls under appeals to conscience, legislation under government regulation. Now, Hardin rejects appeals to conscience and privatization as ineffective and turns to government regulation as law, which has been the primary strategy of the environmental movement since before Hardin wrote in 1968. But Elinor Ostrom, I love this lady, is a Nobel Prize winning economist. She refuted important aspects of Hardin's argument by theorizing about the management of what are called common pool resources, such as fisheries, forests, aquifers, irrigation systems, waste systems, through intermediate institutions guided by 8 design principles. These have proven in some cases over centuries. There's a Swiss case that goes back to the 13th century, well documented because they're Swiss, to be more effective than conscience, privatization, or legislation at protecting some ecological resources. Also key to the principles of sustainable management of common pool resources is the 7th, or for this slide, the Gth. Higher authorities recognize the right of the resource appropriators to self-govern. That is, this tool usually works best when the lawyers and politicians don't get involved. Hands off. I don't have time to get into it here, but suffice it to say, in some circumstances, neither law, nor appreciation of beauty, nor privatization is what will ensure environmental protection. And finally, given the limitations of law, how might appreciation of beauty have concrete and meaningful impact on environmental protection, if not directly through the law? If we're going to save our planet for ourselves, other living beings, and future generations, we cannot depend only on law. As Francis notes, we should not think that political efforts or the force of law will be sufficient to present actions which affect the environment. We will also need to act according to our consciences as individuals in cooperation with other members of our communities to bring about integrated social transformation that includes, but is not limited to, legal and political action. Appreciation of beauty of the natural world is necessary for the formation of individual consciences in relationship with the earth. Francis continues, the existence of laws and regulations is insufficient in the long run to curb bad conduct, even when effective means of enforcement are present. If the laws are to bring about significant, long-lasting effects, the majority of the members of society must be adequately motivated to accept them and personally transformed to respond, so they wouldn't shoot, shovel, and shut up. Only by cultivating sound virtues will people be able to make a selfless ecological commitment. Those virtues perhaps begin with the ability to attend to the beautiful, simply to notice with awe and wonder the beauty of the world around us. And then individual transformation can become the seedbed of communal and social transformation. As Francis argues, we must not think that these efforts are not going to change the world. They benefit society, often unbeknown to us, for they call forth a goodness which, albeit unseen, inevitably tends to spread. Furthermore, such actions can restore our sense of self-esteem. They can enable us to live more fully and to feel that life on earth is worthwhile. And then communal and social transformation can foster a social and political climate that enables meaningful and substantive legislative action. Because the enforcement of laws is at times inadequate due to corruption, Francis writes, public pressure has to be exerted in order to bring about decisive political action. Society, through non-governmental organizations and intermediate groups, must put pressure on governments to develop more rigorous regulations, procedures, and controls. Unless citizens control political power, national, regional, and municipal, it will not be possible to control damage to the environment. Of course, all this depends on responsible political leaders and a healthy politics, in Francis's words, but I'll end here for discussion.
Thank you, all three. We have an extraordinary number of issues on the table, I think, and precious little time during which we can pursue them, but we will give it our best shot here. As our panelists formulate their thoughts, I'll just maybe draw attention to a couple of things. One is, as you just heard, the most recent iteration of with Dr. Liebod, some distinct limits placed on the efficacy of law for the purposes that we're trying to press law into here. And some distinct limits on beauty. So we've got two of the big categories that we are discussing here, really spoken of as limited tools for which we need complementary measures as well. It might be a nice moment to just quickly indicate, we at the Claritas Initiative want to make sure that when we speak of beauty, goodness, and truth, it's not simply a kind of effusive, lovely, isn't everything great kind of message. And sure enough, we get some good, hard, rigorous thinking about beauty in particular here, which is exactly what we're looking for. So maybe with that, I will stop and open things up to our panel, how you all might like to respond to one another quickly, and then with any luck, we'll be able to get a question or two in.
Should I just start? I want to be very brief, just how much I liked both your talks. I found them super well prepared, and so I just think the what Pope Francis says about a better kind of politics based on social friendship is decisive in Fratelli Tutti, and the need for an ecological conversion, in Laudato Si, that it's which doesn't, as we all know, takes time and effort, and but at the same time we do need legislation because businesses are competitive. They need to lower the prices of the goods they sell, so they will always try to get away with pollution and environmental degradation until law comes and forces them to factor in the real costs into their price, and then all of them have to do that, and then they're competitive again. So I do think that legislation is really necessary for that. So okay, that's.
I'll just say I loved all of these remarks. There's so much in there that I would like to be able to read and really sift my way through. But just a couple of brief thoughts. Your closing, Amy, on the need to cultivate virtues of attending to the beautiful. I think that's something resonates with what I'm trying to argue too. And I'm wondering, whether we here at St. Thomas, because of this initiative, can just try to do that in our teaching and our formation, getting people to pause and see and not be so cynical about how we describe things, but describe things as beautiful or not beautiful in deeper ways, or letting them see in the technical craft of a legal argument, there's that beauty there. Why do we think that's beautiful? Because it does some of those things that you are describing, not just because it's achieving a certain result. Mm-hmm. And then just one really quick comment. When you show the picture of the Pistons, so you could appreciate the beauty. I thought that was a gorgeous picture, right? And so I don't know anything about Pistons, but there were colors and forms that I know are responding to sort of universal ideas about what's pleasing to the eye and ratios of different colors. So I wouldn't want to say that you have to have the expertise to appreciate beauty, but there's different kinds of beauty.
Yeah, I had the same reaction when I saw them now.
Yeah.
Because it's true. Yeah, there was something to it. But it's beautiful as a picture. But when you see the engine there, you don't have this picture. It's just,
yeah.
It wasn't as beautiful as that picture.
A little more grease involved.
Just grease.
Noise.
I was struck by the connections between the ephemeral and the eternal in law, and was thinking a bit about Aristotle and the way that he talks about justice and the difficulty of achieving legal justice because of its need to be general, and that it's where we encounter the specifics, the contextual, the circumstantial, the immediate relationships with other people, and get the fuller story of what's happening, that we tend to become more merciful and also more caring of the cases that we're attending to. And what are the practices that we need to be able to attend to the contextual and the concrete and the circumstantial in ways that we can hear and see the other, whether the other be the natural world or other people, in ways that get us to that sense of the beauty. And speaking of the sunflowers example, I was reminded of Iris Murdoch, who has this beautiful passage talking about being caught up in herself, like having one of those internal arguments with somebody in her head, and going to a window and looking outside and seeing a kestrel dangling in the air, hunting, prepared to pounce upon some rodent, poor rodent. We didn't talk about nature being red and tooth and claw, but it is. And for a moment, admiring the kestrel, and then returning to herself and whatever the argument she was having in her brain, softening and able to hear the other person's perspective better, because she had that encounter with the beauty of something that wasn't herself. And so perhaps there's also some practices of attending to the beauty of the world that maybe helps us in our formation, where in our work for justice, we can attend to the concrete better.
That's great.
Murdoch's line at that moment is, "There's nothing now but kestrel," right? She just completely, it commands her attention and pulls her out of herself, as you're indicating. I wonder if there, one theme that could be pulled through all three of your presentations is that law is limited for not only because of its efficacy, but also because it seems like the three of you are saying in different ways, it is in an important regard the end of a process that begins with a formation of the human person, in which beauty can actually play a significant role. So attending to that is key for how law ends up getting worked out. And one can talk about a flow maybe in that direction, and be aware when law fails, that's one of the things that needs to be addressed in order to make it work better. Let's do here though, if we can, from anyone who might have a question or a comment, anything to say?
Yeah, I guess one of my questions that I was stewing on is that when we're talking about especially anything with regards to the law, that is something that requires some form of precise definition, which beauty seems to elude. In a way, it's like this Platonic ideal that's really hard to distinguish from just mere promise. So I guess, what is the way, like, how is the approach take to actually identify what is beautiful? Or is that in and of itself just sort of this hubris because it's identified, it's trying to impose something that exists naturally?
Let me just repeat it quickly for the sake of the recording so the microphone's got it. So the concern is that the practice of law requires a certain specificity, and that beauty as a category tends to elude such definitions. How might one address that issue?
I think it's a really good question, especially with regards to the natural world, snail darters. And also, there will be ecologists who will look to the snail darter with great admiration, and everyone around them will wonder at that assessment. And the natural world does involve a fair amount of death and destruction and violence and extra pelican babies that are born just for insurance that end up dead on in the colony. Like, it's bleak out there, guys. And it requires us to think about how is it that this evolutionary process that results in the range of the natural world and the diversity of life that we have is in fact beautiful, both in a view from far up above of looking at the whole of planet Earth, and the very specificity of small ecosystem exchanges. And I don't think I have precise words for what that definition might be, but I have a sense of what the definition would have to encompass, in sense of both the deeply local interactions of bacteria and fungi that make a forest floor able to function as the source of nutrients for an ecosystem, and also to imagine this blue marble floating in space that is the only possibility of a home that we have. So it has to encompass both of those things and probably everything in between.
I would add, I don't, there's no way any law or judicial decision could even attempt to define beauty. In that, thinking that a law can give us an answer, a specific answer that's going to be helpful for us. But the point is that we are humans who are using the law, and we can respond to and have experiences of beauty, and we can use our experiences of what is beautiful and what is not to determine how we're going to use the law or what those laws ought to be. But I don't think the law itself can even. We shouldn't be looking there for a definition of beauty.
Well, I don't know. I think the Ten Commandments are beautiful. And the wisdom of Solomon when he has these two women who are quarreling about who's the mother, and he has this idea. I mean, that's a beautiful argument. So I do think we can appreciate beautiful arguments that bring out truth and goodness in human life, and we say, wow, that's beautiful, the way he said that or she said that. And I don't think complicated legal texts are beautiful. I find them horrible. I don't understand. I mean, both in American and in European law.
I love the UCC. I love, love, love it. I often tell my students how beautiful the Uniform Commercial Code is.
Okay, well, I don't know that one. I do know the forms I have to fill out for, I don't know, for all kinds of W8, horrible. I didn't understand a single abbreviation. What are they talking about? But anyhow, so yeah, that would for me be a lack of clarity, lack of claritas, these forms, but not accessible. So
I think also to Elizabeth's point is that oftentimes we need to be trained to be able to see beauty. My dad was taught high school English for 30 years and then became a field ornithologist as a second career and took me out bird watching, which was so freaking boring, like endlessly boring. And also it was a training in being patient enough to simply see what was before you. And that we need to be trained to be able to understand ecosystems, and we need to be able to train to know what makes a beautiful legal argument or an elegant math proof or a compelling experiment in a lab. And so there can be that sort of immediate human response to the wonder of the Grand Canyon, but there's also like 8-year-olds standing by the Grand Canyon being like, when can I go away now? And we have to be trained and informed in this as well.
It can also be abused, the beauty of my weapons, what was with the atom bomb, the beauty of having produced this, but
Well, with our consideration of these issues begun, but by no means concluded, I fear that we must stop at least for now. Please join me in thanking our panelists. And thank you all for coming.